I was lucky enough, really privileged, to live in Manhattan and to be at Studio 54 quite a few nights a week and always get in. And I was always like making myself some new kind of outrageous, ridiculous kind of outfit to wear, but that's what you needed to get in. And nobody, except maybe Emperor Nero in Rome, had ever seen a nightlife as outrageous and as free and as hedonistic as Studio 54. Well, hi, everybody. It's Diane Gilman, formerly known as the Queen of Jeans on QVC-HSN, but now the proud host of my podcast, Fashion Thursdays with Diane. So it must be Thursday, and it must be very close to my 80th birthday. Can you believe it? I can't. But when people ask me, what was your favorite decade? That is so easy, the 70s. Now, I always believe that a decade starts a little sooner than the actual beginning of it. But the 60s were pretty great in building up an aura of rebellion, of freedom, of incredible music. But the 70s, wow. That was almost like a polished, little more grown up version of the 60s. So 1970, I was 25. Everything seemed possible. Everything seemed in front of me. I had just followed the music scene up to San Francisco, and it was wild times. I'm not going to tell you a lie. It was all about creativity, a huge sense of freedom, an aura of naivete, very optimistic, very life is in front of you, get set, and boom, go. And so I want to start with music because so much of what was the real bulwark of the 70s, the foundations, which are going to be music, movies, television, and of course, nightlife and designers. So we're going to go with the 4 top songs of the 70s. First, my all-time favorite, just personally, Bohemian Rhapsody. There's nobody like Freddie Mercury. Queen was an incredible group. Born to Run. Oh, yeah. And actually, one of my best friends from the 70s, Patty, married Mick Rock, the famous rock and roll photographer that did this album cover, which was revolutionary with the lighting and the black backdrop and the mystery of it all. And he had a lot of stories to tell about Freddie Mercury. A lot. It was fascinating. But these guys were all pretty accessible at that time. Stairway to Heaven with Led Zeppelin, when you think about it. And also the Eagles with Hotel California. Those songs are still with us today, almost 60 years later. We could have put in Sympathy for the Devil with the Rolling Stones, which have lasted all those years. But imagine the excitement. This was rock and roll's epic era, the 70s. And that music has never faded, never died, never gone unappreciated, and set the foundation for the current music industry. And it's amazing to me. Most of these guys never wanted to end their careers. And if they're well and able, and we could have put Rod Stewart in here too, but if they're well and able, they're still touring in some sense. And, you know, it's funny because that's sort of the way I felt about my career. As long as I could do it, I loved it so much, I was going to do it. So let's go in the 70s to Hollywood. And what do you think the 4 top movies of the decade are? Godfather. Those people, the stars, if they're still here, chances are they're still working. Jaws. That was hilarious. And actually, for many, many Americans, changed their whole attitude about going in the water at the beach. It did for me, that's for sure. But that was the emergence of Steven Spielberg. And I have to tell you, when I went to UCLA from 1963 to about 1967, 68. Steven Spielberg was hanging around the campus. He was just sitting in on classes, not really getting any kind of credit for them. And then he made his huge hit. Imagine 60 years later. Nobody forgets this movie. It comes out once a year. It's a big deal. Same for Godfather. One of my very favorites was Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. And I think that that movie is as relevant today as it was almost 60 years ago. And the truth is, it's about the fringes in society. It's about insanity and access to weapons. And there was Robert De Niro. And who could ever deny that this was a freakishly major talent? And last of all, and probably my favorite and a total introduction to a horror genre, was The Exorcist. And that movie was so disturbing to me, especially the part where her head whirls around and around. I think it took me a few years to even get to the end of the movie. I would get so disturbed I would have to turn it off. And also the mother, Ellen Burstyn, she was wearing what I consider probably the classic epitome of a mom slash housewife kind of 70s wardrobe. Little cardigans, make half dresses. And so in every single one of these movies, including Sybil Shepherd in Taxi Driver, wearing the original wrap dress, which was Gucci. Yeah, you started to get a smattering of just how powerful the fashion industry could be in terms of mass producing what you saw on the screen and magically making it not only what you wanted, but what you could get a hold of as well. All in all, I'm going to say the 70s to me was one of the most creative decades I've experienced. It was an era, it's funny because everybody always talks about, oh my God, the economy was so bad in the 70s. But if you were young like me, you were on the fringes of making money, especially if you were in a creative industry like fashion design like I was, and following around rock groups and hand painting leather for them like I did for Rod Stewart. And so it was like economy. What? You were just looking for that next $50 bill for hand painting a pair of leather short shorts for Sylvester, who was one of the first stars of disco. So I saw it as an era of youth, as an era of opportunity, as an era of beauty and creativity, then and recognize that we didn't even get a TV until 1952, 1953. Yeah, we were then like the third person on our block in LA to have a TV that had exactly two shows broadcast for 4 hours a day and was dark for 20 hours a day. All right, now we come to television. Television is seen as a stepchild of movies. It's not like today where you have all the streaming and frankly some of the best acting, best scripts, best writing, best directing is all pervaded on streaming, which can include TV, but it could be your phone, your computer, anything. I love it. So, All in the Family, number one show, believe it or not, of the 70s. I never watched it. I had no relationship to it at all. MASH? Oh yeah, Alan Alda made it so cool. And that the whole thing was so cool and so tongue in cheek. And it was really an acerbic comedy with a very cutting edge to it. I love that. Happy Days? Well, I would like to say I didn't watch it, but of course I watched it. Of course I did. Charlie's Angels. Oh, yeah. And then, it was just so coincidental that one or two out of the three Charlie's Angels wound up. Jocelyn Smith wound up on HSN. Jocelyn Smith actually was really influential in fashion, was one of the first television celebrities to get involved, had a huge fashion line that retailed at Walmart, Kmart. Nobody had ever heard of that before. and that was multi-millions. But it was Farrah Fawcett who, to me, really influenced me the most. At this woman. Number one, how did she get her hair that way? I didn't even know there was such a thing as a blow dry. Second of all, how could she be that perfect, that beautiful, that thin, that athletic? She embodied the myth of the California girl. And I believe that she single handedly brought in the fashion gene. Come on. Nobody looked better in a pair of jeans than that woman. And don't you love it? I love the first picture where she's crouched down on her skateboard boogie board. We used to call them boogie boards. But it took me a long time after that to finally get my first blow dry. I was still like sort of living in the era of air dry, hippie chick, chia pet. And the last thing in television that has endured and vintaged like unbelievably well is Saturday Night Live. SNL was created in 1975. No one had ever seen anything like it before. You're talking about John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd. I mean, you're talking about legends in the comic industry. And here we are today, and we're still watching. And that just speaks to the intense amount of creativity at a level where I hear about television today because I have friends that are screenwriters and work in Hollywood. They talk about how nobody wants anything new. It's too dangerous. They want a repeat. They want a season 2. They want a Jaws 2, a Jaws 3, a Jaws 4. Nobody wants to take a bet on newness. Nobody trusts creativity. And, I found that was really true in the fashion industry. I could tell people my biggest worth was being creative, and they looked at you like, what do I need a creative person for? It's interesting that there are so many industries that absolutely live and thrive on creative juices, but it is the lowest denominator on their list of must-haves. So who can forget unbelievable sketches like Rosanna Dana on Saturday Night Live? I mean, I think even just on its own, it became a language of its own. And to me, it was probably the first must-have television. There she is, Rosanna Dana. The first television where you weren't cool unless you were watching Saturday Night Live. And then everybody wanted to talk about it. Everybody wanted to imitate it. Everybody wanted to tell the jokes over and over again. It became very much, to me, what we're like today, where we're all watching, like, at this point, The Gilded Age, last year's Secession, where you're discussing, seriously, as if it was some kind of epic novel you had to read for school to graduate. We were discussing SNL. And it was so daring. And there were so many politicized jokes in it that would never be allowed today. But it really set the tone to me for what mid 70s into the 80s and onward. It's had its dips, but it's at another, I think, mid-high again, what society was about. And you got it. Now, in London, just as an aside, in England, that was duplicated by Monty Python, which was very English. And I didn't get half of it, but I found it hilarious. So we were all out for comedy. And when you really look at all of the top TV shows, here's what you got. All in the Family, comedy. MASH, comedy. Happy Days, comedy. SNL, comedy. Charlie's Angels. That was just ridiculous. 3 gorgeous women. They just talk to this guy on the phone and go put their lives on the line. But you know what? That truly became, I think, the first show where it was worship of beauty. And beauty could do anything. You just had to be beautiful. And of course, nobody was ever going to look like Farrah Fawcett beside Farrah Fawcett. So I want to now go into fashion, my domain, for the 70s. You know, we honestly had just formulated the fashion industry. We had just started mass producing, and that was a whole new thing where you could go into, and that of course fed department stores which proliferated like bunnies, and you could go in and see all the major looks that were available, kind of who you wanted to be, including, and we don't have it on this list, but Gunny Sacks by Jessica McClintock, who was a friend of mine for years, where you could be a prairie girl in an ankle length skirt walking around looking like you were going to get into a horse and carriage and go back to your Amish farm. That was one of the major mass produced businesses of the 70s. So who were the designers? First of all, he had the Halstonettes. That was Pat Cleveland. It was also Iman and a whole series of models. There's Halston. And he called them the Halstonettes. Great. And they went with him everywhere. And they were the nightlife of New York. And they wore Halston. And they looked untouchable, incredible, so beautiful. And he was also the one who, in the height of her career, dressed Liza Minnelli. And you'll see her in outfits that are just all chiffon. Yeah, he brought so much glamour to the scene and so much gravitas, so much the perfect touch to a kind of fashion we'd never really seen before, which was very fluid. It wasn't stiff fabrics. It wasn't Palm Beach. It wasn't structured clothing. There's Mick Jagger's ex-wife, Bianca Jagger, who is incredibly beautiful. And they're all gathering and taking that golden dust that came down from a spoon from a half-sickle moon in the ceiling at Studio 54 at the end of the evening at about 2 a.m. Halston set a tone for fashion. He was truly the first really creative, really modern couturier of that decade, and his name has been used again and again since then. He also, in his own way, epitomized the decadence of the 70s, that was Gloria Gaynor, which was all about drugs. I mean, Studio 54 built on drugs, especially cocaine. So Studio 54 started in 1977, went on to 1980, and you would see Halston there almost every time I went. I would see him wafting through the crowd. By the way, he was very beautiful man. I also want to say the other person I saw a lot there was Diane von Furstenberg, GVF. She was at the time married to Egon von Furstenberg, prince of the royal von Furstenberg family. Both Halston and Egon von Furstenberg passed away from AIDS, another hallmark of the 70s going into the 80s, but the dark side, really the dark side. DVF, it was brilliant. I believe it was taken from an original Gucci dress that Sybil Shepherd wore in Taxi Driver. Needless to say, women were entering the workforce. They had to. We were just the burgeoning of the corporate life. And it was a mix of tailoring and feminist kind of dressing. It mixed it all together. Diane von Furstenberg was definitely a legend and very smart. Went through a whole period of her career where she lost her name. I can relate to that. And then came back again, like in the 90s, 2000s, but she was gone from the scene for a while. I would say, as a fashion incubator, YSL, Yves Saint Laurent, was almost untouchable. And actually, YSL, left bank, Rive Gauche, was the first time anybody took a couturier, or he took himself, and created a lower priced, available to the public in a mass way, well produced collection. And that went on for years, and he introduced the trouser and bow blouse, and he had a softness to the tops. And that was when Paris was so influential. Everybody wanted to learn how to speak French. Everybody wanted to say they went to Paris. And it was incredible back then. Yeah. Last time I was there, it definitely had its problems. Everybody was on strike for all 5 days I was there. You couldn't get around anywhere. People were angry. People were tired. But you know what? Then Paris was really beautiful and pure. The shops were unbelievable. We used to go there for like 9 days and do nothing from morning till night but shop. What an ideal career for a shopaholic like me. Well, with YSL, and I must say, DVF and Halston represented America. YSL was France. Giorgio Armani. Now, here was a genius, and I will tell you, and it wasn't the 70s, because nobody could civilize me at that point in the 70s. But also, I didn't have the money to invest in his clothing. But I remember in the 80s, when I was just making it with my first mass produced designs, I had a boyfriend who said, "You cannot be seen as a civilized female without owning a Giorgio Armani wardrobe." And he forced me to go to Giorgio Armani on Madison Avenue. He dragged me there and he made me buy a whole little capsule collection. That is very styled. I don't think I ever got a chance to do anything like that with a scarf tie, but it was the real men's trouser that was pleated. It was definite, super strong shoulder pads. It was fabric, and the fabric I did love. And that fabric was a heavyweight, super enriched wool blend crepe. So it had no sheen to it. It was totally matte. And the thing that was wild about Giorgio Armani suits was the drape. You had never seen tailored clothing that wasn't rigid. And I loved Ralph Lauren polo too, but that was more rigid. Yeah. Look at how fabulous she looks in that. Wow. I never looked that good. Never. But I did grow a love for tailored clothing, and especially blazers. Never really the trouser, but I still love that look today. Almost 60 years later again. And it's still, I just see a really beautifully tailored blazer as a piece of armor. It shapes you, it holds you in, it gives you authority. And we had seen it a little bit in Hollywood in the 30s and the 40s, like Marlene Dietrich, Katharine Hepburn, but Armani was quintessential. And then really the other thing I love from the era, but we could only choose so many people, was Ralph Lauren and the navy blazer with the gold buttons and the golden crest on it. I've never lost my love for that either. As a matter of fact, I'm looking for one. In case anybody has one in mind, let me know about it. So with all of that in mind, I just want to end my favorite decade, now that I'm turning 80, with Studio 54 and the romanticism, the shock of it all. Oh, yeah. Here's Bianca Jagger after she left Mick Jagger, celebrating her birthday, galloped into Studio 54 on a white horse. Of course, who wouldn't? And she was wearing Halston. She used to be really a part of the whole Halston gang. She wasn't exactly one of the Halstonettes, but there's Jerry Hall. That was his current girlfriend. There's Andy Warhol. There's Truman Capote. I mean, it was a scene on a scene on a scene. And there had never been a nightlife like this in America. It could only come to a country that was so much, had a trajectory on the rise. There's Halston, and there's Tina Turner, God bless her. A sense of I can do anything I want, and a sense of the world is my oyster, and a party theme, day and night for a lot of people I knew, and this is just sort of the end of the evening. And it was truly in 1980 when it closed down. Yeah, it reopened, but not with the original ownership and not with the original flair. at all. But it was the end of an era, and it was an era that was so original. I think that's what I want to say about the 70s. It was so refreshing, so invigorating, so exciting because it was an era we'd never seen before. The movies were artful and thoughtful and intelligent and amazing and exciting and an incredible narrative of storytelling. The music, people like Freddie Mercury still live today as if he's still alive and he's still just 38 years old. And the music is so beautiful. And imagine living through those times and you'd never heard anything like that before. Again, the television, well, we never had television before, and it was truly the golden age of TV in the 70s. The designer industry, fashion had just begun to become a behemoth, so it was still touchable and personable, but at the same time, you could just feel the massive energy to it and how much bigger, 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 bigger it was getting. And where did you want to be? Who did you want to be? And that's how you dressed. And then, of course, the nightlife. I was lucky enough, really privileged, to live in Manhattan and to be at Studio 54 quite a few nights a week and always get in. And I was always like making myself some new kind of outrageous, ridiculous kind of outfit to wear, but that's what you needed to get in. And nobody, except maybe Emperor Nero in Rome. Hi, today we're talking about Particlar. This is a series of supplements, and let me tell you what, if you are aging with any sort of inflammation that becomes one of the biggest issues in your everyday life, and swelling and joint pain, oh, I'm on it 100%. I've begun a new vitamin regime from Particlar that has literally changed my life, and I feel so much better on a daily basis. Try it out with a discount using our code below. You are going to love it. Had ever seen a nightlife as outrageous and as free and as hedonistic as Studio 54. And with that, I wrap up the 70s. I hope you got some kind of flavor of what that era was and what it was like. But it was so enriching. And it is as exciting for me to relate it to you more than half a century later than it was when I lived it. 80 is the new 80. Wish me a happy birthday. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to Too Young to Be Old podcast. The episode may be over, but the fun doesn't have to stop here. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at The Diane Gilman, or visit our website, thedianegilman.com. If you like the show, leave us a rating or a review and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And until then, don't forget, age is just a number. Together, we'll prove that we are all too young to be old.